born on July 1930, in the city of, in Polish it would be pronounced Mysłowice. In German it's Myslowice. And so I was born in Poland, but we were German. Well, I went to a German minority school, and we didn't have much chance to learn very much, but we had one lesson in Polish with a Polish teacher who really didn't care whether she taught us anything or didn't. So it was hard. We were kind of some kids got beaten up by the other kids, by the Polish kids, and that's what prejudice is about. I was an only child, and my mother died when I was 3 years old, so that left me with my father and my grandmother, who mostly took care of me. I lived mostly with my grandmother and also with my Aunt Gertrude. And my father at that time worked on the railroad. But when I started going to German minority school, he lost his job. And then my grandmother helped him to open up a small grocery store. And a lot of the Polish people were boycotting his store because we were German. My father was arrested and taken to Siberia, where he died of hunger in one of the death marches. Shortly after that, after he was arrested, the order came out for women and children and old people to assemble in a certain place in the city with provisions for 3 days. And so we did, and I went with my stepmother and her sister and niece. And we were loaded into cattle cars and started our journey west, which took about a month approximately. And we were crammed into these box cars with a lot of people, and there was no food, no sanitation. Every so often the cars would stop, but other than that we were just going, and it very slow, until we came to the end of to the start of the Russian zone, where we were unloaded and we were on our own, with no food, no clothing, nothing, and no transportation. The country was just destroyed. We survived on food that we begged for or stole, or whatever we had to do to survive. We walked all the way to the border of to the Russian zone, and then again walked some more. Once in a while we were able to get on the train, but that didn't happen very often. And we ended up at the border of the Russian-American zone. At that time, Germany was divided into 4 zones: the Russian, the French, the British, and the American zone. Our goal was to get to the American zone. Having crossed the Russian zone and having met other refugees, and by rumors we were finally approaching the Russian-American border. It was divided by a piece of no man's land. And of course, we were afraid to get shot at by the Russian soldiers who didn't want us to cross into the American zone. So we ran, and we ran for our lives. I fell into a ditch. And when I don't know if I lost consciousness, but when I came to, I was being lifted up by a black man. And I had never seen a black man before. He was a American soldier, a big black guy with a good hat. Well, I didn't know any English, so whatever he said, it was good. So we were put into this home. There was an abandoned large home from Germans that had fled, and we were given food, baths, being deloused. Believe it or not, we were filthy. And from then on, we kept going. Our destination was we were already in the American zone, but my stepmother and her sister had a niece living in Stuttgart. So that was our aim to get there. So it took us quite some time, but we managed to get there. And my stepmother's niece was able to put us up. We had 2 small rooms in the attic, in their attic, and which was, after all we had been through, it was paradise. So we were settled, and now I had to get a job, which I found. I found an office job as an apprentice, and also went to night school. But an apprentice job just didn't pay enough to support myself and my stepmother. She was not able to work because she suffered from depression after all we went through. So I had to find another job, which I did. It was in working for an Armenian man who owned a jewelry store. It was jewelry and antiques. A lot of Germans had to sell their valuables because they needed the money to buy food. And so I worked there, and this is where I met Georgette, my future sister-in-law. One day she said, "I have a boyfriend who has a brother, and I would like you to meet." So we went on a double date. Yeah, he was kind of cute, and well, we went on our first double date, and we went on the Neckar River. There was a place where you could rent boats, so we rented a boat, and I ended up in the water, but I couldn't swim, so I had a good chance of drowning. I was holding on to the boat for dear life. That was our first date. After that, we went on quite a few dates. We went to the movies, or dancing, or walking in the park, and a number of times my stepmother wouldn't let me out of the house because she didn't like foreigners.
And he was a foreigner.
And he was a foreigner. And so I climbed out the window onto the roof of the adjacent house, And to this day, I don't remember how I got out and down to the street, but I guess I did. As time went by, well, he proposed, and I accepted. But my stepmother said, no, you are not going to get married. So, but we did anyway. Well, we didn't run off. We had our civil ceremony, which is mandatory, and afterwards we had a little party, very noisy party. Armenians party real noisy. So we did that, and our church ceremony, which is optional, we had 2 weeks later because our priest was out of town and he couldn't marry us. So for the church ceremony I had, well, I didn't have anything. So a lady in the Armenian community borrowed a dress for me and shoes, white shoes and veil, and I have the pictures to prove it. And all was well. My stepmother didn't want to come to the ceremony, but then some people went and they talked her into it, and all was well after that. After we were married, I moved into the camp in Stuttgart, and shortly after that, we were ready to come to the United States. It was all done by quota. So many people went to went to different countries, wherever they could get a visa to. Some people went to, of course, most went to the United States. Some went to Canada, some to Brazil, some, you know, whatever country was willing to take refugees in. And so we got our visa to the United States, luckily. And in December we were called. We had one suitcase. Those were all our belongings. And we got to the camp where it was very cold. They put us up in the barracks in one room that had broken windows, no heating, no lights. So somehow we got through the night, and the next morning we were settled in another room and got food and all that. And I had to see a doctor. And he was a very nice doctor, because he just looked at me and he said, you can go, you're okay. So the weekend went by, and here we are ready to get on the transport to go to the airport, when this Russian lady doctor comes and decides to examine me, and she says, no, you cannot go, you're too far advanced. And so of course I start getting hysterical, and they get scared that something might happen to me. And because I kept saying, that doctor last week said I could go. And so they were kind of scared, and they, as luck would have it, that doctor, that French doctor, had gone skiing over the weekend and broken his leg and was in the hospital. And so they called him in the hospital, and he said, yes, she can go. And so that's how we ended up on the plane and came to the United States. It took 22 hours to fly to New York. And we arrived, but of course those were the Middle Ages, and our paperwork hadn't followed us. So the immigration officers were ready to send us back. It's not that they would have handed us the paperwork in hand in Munich. They would somehow follow, I don't know, by some kind of magic. But anyway, there was no record of us arriving in New York. So of course here came my hysterics again. I should get hysterical more often. I get good results. And so finally they straightened it out. And we were met by an Armenian lady from an Armenian
A refugee?
refugee assistance league, and she took us in. She put us up in a hotel overnight, which, thinking back, it must have been some kind of slummy hotel, but it was heaven. It had a nice clean bed, and it had a bathroom down the hall with one of those great big deep bathtubs, and oh boy, that was nice. And she had downstairs was a coffee shop, so we had dinner there, and she had left orders to serve us breakfast in the morning. And one thing I remember having breakfast, Pop was asking for, Greg was asking for sugar, and the waitress pointed it because there was this old-fashioned glass container full of sugar, and we couldn't, we were not used to have this much sugar, having come from Europe where everything was rationed. And so anyway, that was one of the things we remember. And then the lady came and she put us on a train to Boston.